spirit, like two hearts that beats as one.
We were so sure that we were going to spend our lives together.
He seemed a perfect gentleman.
But, ooh, gosh, I just hit the jackpot, mate.
I just knew that something was not right, and that gnawed away at me day and night.
So what is it in total? I forgot.
27,500.
I couldn't believe it. Where has my money gone?
Her profile picture was her on her wedding day, looking up adoringly into the eyes of her bridegroom, and her bridegroom was my husband.
This whole incident has just altered my perception of people.
Every person I've met is a lie. Everything's a lie. What an idiot.
They are vile human beings, and I can't stress that enough. They care about money, and they don't care who they have to trample on to get it.
He seemed a perfect gentleman.
November 2016. Carol Goodall and Gary Rogers' big day.
The moment that I put my ring on my finger, I was absolutely overjoyed. I was so proud to think that I'm going to be Mrs. Rogers.
But Gary isn't the man she thinks he is.
The police showed me so many different names that he'd been using. I kept thinking, this is not the person that I know.
As I started to research the case, I realised that he'd done it before. And he'd not just done it once, he'd done it multiple times.
Carol is determined to uncover the whole truth.
He'd given me his passwords to get onto his email accounts. So I was like a detective. I was going through all his emails every single night.
This is the story of how a serial con man's manipulation and lies cost Carol over £180,000.
I felt devastated, absolutely devastated. I lost my home, I lost my money, I lost everything. I was married for 25 years. The marriage broke down, unfortunately. But my main concern was the children, to make sure that they were absolutely fine in their lives.
My mum's caring. She's lovable. She's hardworking, really hardworking.
Carol works as a carer for people with dementia.
I love being a carer. I like the thought that I'm actually there helping people in their last few years of their life.
If they're short-staffed and it's her day off, she'll still go in and make sure she does the best that she can.
I was on my own for 9 years. I was feeling lonely. I wanted to be with someone to share all the experiences together and, you know, go away on holiday and things like that. I felt it's time now to get back out there and start thinking of me. A friend of mine introduced me to dating sites, which I'd never been on before. When I was younger, you know, you used to go out and find somebody. I met my ex-husband at school. So going into this new, strange way of meeting people was quite nerve-wracking.
Mum's not really good with technology, to be honest. So she was like, Kirsty, can you help me?
All I put on there for my profile was that I was 5'3", blonde hair, green eyes. My interests were gardening, decorating, walking the dogs, anything normal.
I was like, had any matches? She's like, yeah, a few, but some of them aren't my type.
I just kept thinking, I'm just not getting anywhere and I'm getting the wrong type of people. And then I was contacted by a man called Gary. When Gary first got in contact with me, he seemed completely different to other people that I'd spoken to, constantly asking me how I was. He seemed really polite.
She was looking for a partner to share her life with after a 25-year marriage had ended. Someone loving and honest and reliable. And that's how he presented himself.
It was really nice to think that this person was interested in me. Sometimes we'd sit up for ages and ages just talking.
She was like, he's hardworking, he's got a company, he deals with cars and things. I was like, oh.
He was a mechanic, worked with Jaguars. Just getting to know each other really slowly was nice instead of rushing into everything, you know. We're not youngsters anymore. We can just take our time and get to know each other properly. Gary asked me about my marriage and stuff like that. He told me that his first wife had passed away from cancer. Then he'd got married again. He'd had 3 children, got divorced from her, and he married this other lady on the rebound.
Gary tells Carol he is technically still married, but wouldn't be for much longer, as his divorce paperwork is on the verge of being finalised. After back-and-forth messages for 2 weeks, Gary and Carol set a date to meet at a local pub on Boxing Day.
This was probably the first day I'd been on in, God, years. And it was absolutely years. I actually got to this place about 10 to, something like that. I was just so nervous. I felt constantly sick. And in the end, I thought, oh, no, pull yourself together. This car pulled up, a brown Jag. He got out the car. He came over to me and he said, oh, hi, Carol. Gave me a peck on the cheek and he said, how are you? He opened the door for me. Where would you like to sit? The conversation just sort of rolled all the time. We had a bit of a giggle. We sat there as if we'd known each other for years. All of a sudden, he held my hand across the table and he said, I've got something to tell you. I just wanted to be upfront with you. He said, I've actually been in prison. And I went, right, okay. And he told me he defrauded the bank. The business was going under. He didn't want his workforce losing their jobs. So he got this loan out, but defrauded them. He said to me, are you all right with that? And I said, I'm not very happy, but I can understand why you did it. He said, it's a mistake that I have regretted and I just want to get on with my life and be a better person.
When she got back, I said, oh, how did it go? She was like, oh, yeah, it was really nice. He was funny, he was charming. I said, you're going to see him again? She said, yeah, hopefully.
I was thinking, you know, the date went really, really well, but I still had this feeling in my mind, do I really want to get involved with somebody that's been in prison? But then I kept thinking, well, everyone makes mistakes, we're all human. He's been truthful with me. He's admitted it. Let's move on. Well, that was that.
What did I say it was? It's gone down.
Carol decides to forgive Gary's criminal past, and their relationship develops quickly.
We talk every single day.
She had a spring in her step, and I was like, this is really nice to see. She was smiling a lot more. It was like having a new lady in the house.
It is an exciting time when you first meet somebody. Your world seems to sort of go upside down because you're trying to experience so many things together. We'd go away for weekends, never know where I was going.
He was taking her away a lot. Thought, I like this one. He's all right. He's actually a decent person. It was like everything that she needed. We had a smile. Felt like they just clicked.
Go to Oxford sometimes. We'd go to Rye, we'd go to the Isle of Wight. It was as though someone was coming and just whisking me away, thinking about my needs all the time. I was being swept off my feet every single weekend.
It's been 3 months since Carol and Gary matched on Plenty of Fish, and their whirlwind romance is moving quickly.
Went away one weekend and we were sitting having a meal in the evening, and Gary turned around and said, would you like to get married? I had not got a clue what to say. I just was not expecting it at all. I said, well, just let me think about it for a couple of days. I did speak to the children. They said, if that makes you happy, then do it.
It was a big shock. I was a bit like, whoa. Didn't think that could happen. If she's happy, she's happy.
I said, yeah. The moment that I put my ring on my finger, I was absolutely overjoyed. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream. I was so proud to think that I'm going to be Mrs. Rogers. We were going to be a family. It was a lovely feeling. Couldn't have been happier.
Now that they are engaged, Gary moves into Carol's family home.
It did feel really good to think that there was somebody there that would come up and give me a cuddle and say, how was your day? I didn't want anything spectacular. You know, I didn't want to be out of my depth. Just a normal way of life, a normal family.
He took an interest in my life, what I needed. He was being so genuine, helping us do coursework. A father figure was forming in my mind.
Everything seemed perfect. Gary came home one night and said, we can buy a bigger house. He'd sold his property and he'd got $375,000. So he said, with your property as well, we'd be quite well off. He said that he'd been talking to a friend of his that is a financial advisor, and he said that the houses are going to rocket soon. So if you're going to sell quickly because you'll get a good price. So that's what we did. We decided once my house was sold, if we put the money into the account where Gary had his money, then once we'd found somewhere, then we can just get it from one pot and transfer the money over instead of have it in two different places.
Carol's house is valued at around £170,000. Gary convinces Carol that pooling their money will allow them to buy a bigger house and have some spare cash left over.
Obviously, I wanted to give the children some money, and I thought if I gave them £30,000 each, they could put the money into investments. I discussed that with Gary, and he seemed absolutely fine. He said, we can spare that, no problem at all. We sat down and spoke to the children about it.
Gary suggests that the children put their money into an investment fund that he will manage.
I didn't have any reason not to trust him because everything else he done was what he said he was going to do.
The house sale goes through more quickly than the family expected, so they have to move into a rental property whilst looking for a house to buy. As well as searching for a new home, Carol is also busy wedding planning.
We set a date for the wedding, which was the 10th of September. Then it all started, getting everything else ready for the wedding. Flowers, car, wedding reception, bridesmaids' dresses. There was so much going on. In total, I must have spent about £5,000 to buy everything that was needed.
Suddenly, there's a problem. On his divorce paperwork, Gary is incorrectly listed as a bachelor when he has actually been married before. This needs to be corrected before the wedding can legally go ahead.
He said they're doing their best to get it sorted by next week, but unfortunately, they didn't get it sorted. So we had to cancel everything. I felt absolutely gutted. Not only for me, but because I had to let people down that had booked holiday or days off.
Obviously, I was quite pissed off because I was like, that's my mum. Do you know what I mean? You've ruined her day.
The ceremony had to be delayed, so they put it back to the November of that year.
I spoke to him on many occasions and I said to him, how's the paperwork going? And he said, yeah, I've got just one more bit to do. One night, Gary and I had a bit of an argument and I asked him if he was having me on, and he said, ring him up, ring the registrar place up. So the next day I did, and they were saying, no, just one more piece of paper, but this should be done by the end of the day. Right, okay, brilliant.
The registry office confirms to Carol that the outstanding piece of paperwork is in place and everything is ready to go. 3 days before the big day, they have a rehearsal at the church.
It was a Thursday before we got married on the Saturday. We're standing in the church. All the people that needed to be there were there. I was really emotional. I never thought I would get married again. I didn't think I was good enough for anybody else. My ex-husband always said to me, you would never meet anyone as good as me. And I think I've always kept that on board. It was the nicest feeling that somebody actually wanted to marry me and spend the rest of their lives with me. Gary came in and he said, sorry, but I've got something to tell you. Gary said, Although they said the paperwork was done, it's still not done.
Me and the bridesmaids, we all looked at each other like, what? How can this go wrong twice?
Because Gary's divorce paperwork is still not correct, they can't get married legally.
I felt absolutely devastated. I had all different emotions running around in my head. He said, we're still going to have a blessing on Saturday. Don't worry about it. It seemed to really break my heart to think that I wasn't actually going to be Mrs. Rogers that day. I can remember walking down the steps the morning of the wedding, well, blessing. And my son looked at me and I thought he was going to burst out into tears because I had my wedding dress on, I had my hair done, my makeup done, and his mouth just sort of dropped and he looked as though he was going to burst out into tears. And he said, you look so nice, Mum. Yeah. It was a very short service because obviously it was only a blessing.
It was actually a really, really nice day. Obviously drinking, having all our friends and family around.
Yeah, it was a good day. After the blessing, we all sort of uprooted and went to Ferrin, which is near Littlehampton, because where we were renting, the lease was up.
Gary, Carol and Kirsty moved 30 miles away from where they are living.
Things started to go a bit wrong.
Gary and Kirsty were arguing.
Our relationship kind of went all rocky.
Gary is in charge of paying Carol's children their monthly returns from their investment.
Kirsty would say, well, where's my monthly payment? And he said, well, no, you don't get that until next week.
And I said, so what's going on? Like, I haven't had it now for 2 months. And I was like, I can't put up with this, I can't put up with the lies and him promising me things.
In the end, he made it really difficult for her to stay there. So she moved out, which meant I was basically there on my own with him.
When I moved out, me and Mum were arguing. I'd be moaning about Gary doing this. She'd be like, oh, will you just stop? I didn't tell her half the stuff that was going on in my life. She didn't tell me everything that was going on between her and Gary.
At this point, Gary still has £60,000 of Carol's children's money in his investment account and the money from the sale of her house.
The relationship started going pear-shaped.
She told me they had a relatively short period of being delightfully happy, and then within a few months, things were changing and he was coming up with reasons why he would be going away for the weekend.
On a Friday night, I would get a text from Gary to say, I'm working this weekend, I'll see you Sunday.
She told me that Gary's got a new business, doing something with boats.
It went from he was there every single night to him not coming home at all. I kept trying to phone him saying, you know, what's wrong? What have I done? And he kept saying to me, no, it's not that at all. I'm trying to get some extra money together. I seemed to be slowly going out of my mind. Gary had completely changed. He'd taken me away from my friends. He made it difficult for my kids to stay at home. So I was there on my own. But in the end, I thought, enough is enough. I am not doing this anymore. I said to him, look, you obviously don't want to be with me anymore. Just give me my money. You go your way and I'll go my way. And within 2 hours, he was back home. Of course I want to be with you. He put his arms around me, he kissed me, he cuddled me. I don't want to be with anybody else.
She kept questioning him. Of course, this worried her. He would shower her with affection and tell her he loved her. It kept her nagging suspicions at bay.
You think, oh, right, OK, we're back to normal again because he's coming home and, you know, he's contacting me during the day.
But normality doesn't last long for Carol.
One Sunday, I went round the corner to get something to eat, and I had a text on my phone. And I knew it was obviously nobody that I knew because it came up as a number and not a name. I looked at the text and it said, whatever you and Gary are playing at, it's not very nice. And I thought, what? And I thought, well, who is this? I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I hadn't done anything wrong to anybody. I thought, I'm going to ring it. This person picked up the phone and she said, hello. And I said, you've just texted me? I'm sorry. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, are you with Gary? I said, well, I am with Gary, but he's not here at the moment. She said, so am I. I'm with Gary as well. Getting engaged. Then it all fell into place. Why he wasn't at home every weekend. He wasn't doing jobs. He was with somebody else. The reason why his phone was turned off was not because his battery had gone flat. It was because he turned it off because he didn't want any interruptions.
She was another one of the victims, and Gary had been romancing her too.
We stayed on the phone for over 2 hours talking. We were going over the same stories of what he was telling her and what he was telling me. And it was near enough exactly the same. He got her to try and sell her house, taking her away every weekend. He wasn't working. He wasn't trying to make money for us. He was going off. He was going off because he'd got what he wanted off of me. My money was in his account, and he was trying to do exactly the same to her.
He had a method that seemed to work. He had a method that seemed to work for him, which seems to have revolved around a very quick romance. You know, we're talking 2 months or so between the fine dining, some weekends away, and popping the question. He doesn't seem to have been content to just work on one woman at a time. As his funds started to dwindle, he'd move on to the next woman, but he'd keep all his irons in the fire at the same time.
I can remember both of us saying, something's got to be done about this. And we both said, once we put the phones down, then we are going to contact the police. When I contacted the police that night, I told her the story. We was on the phone for about 3/4 of an hour to an hour. She said, you will be hearing from a detective and they will be taking your case up.
While the police begin their investigations, Carol has started her own.
Gary had given me his passwords to get onto his email accounts. And luckily enough, he hadn't changed his password. So I was like a detective. I was going through all his emails every single night. And this particular email came up from a solicitor. It said about a valuation on this lady's house. And I thought, oh my God, he's doing it again.
Carol speaks to the woman who originally told her about Gary's behaviour.
The two of them were terrified that somebody else was also going to be defrauded by this man. They decided to warn the third woman what was going on, and they sent her a letter.
We sent it to her, thinking that she would go to the police after reading it. But unfortunately, she didn't. She confronted Gary about it, and he's lost his temper and he beat her up. Our intentions was to keep her safe and to make sure that she kept her property and to stay away from him. If I'd thought for 1 minute Gary would have done that, I would not have done it.
Sussex Police assign a detective to Carol's case.
First task was just to actually find out what was going on. We've got Carol stating that there's theft, there's fraud, and we went through all the evidence that we'd got.
Once Detective Simmons begins to dig, he realises what they found from Carol is just the tip of the iceberg. Detective Simmons arranges to meet with Carol outside her house in an unmarked car.
I went out to her home address to talk through the case, and I explained the direction that I would want to take with the investigation.
He showed me a big piece of paper, and there was so many different names that he'd been using. I remember thinking, oh my God, all those names. I was trying to take it all in. I was trying to think of what kind of person could do this. The police said to me that his name was Richard Charles Robinson.
From a tactical point of view, having a different name means that if the victim gets a little bit suspicious, does a Google search on that name, it won't come up with anything. Having an alias also helps him to lie. When somebody's speaking to him using that name, it doesn't make him self-aware. It gives him that psychological ability to distance himself, makes it easier to maintain a lie all the way through. If you look at the way that Gary presented himself, he's creating this persona, and part of that's with the name as well. Gary is the most popular first name that he chooses. It's kind of a working man's name. He presented himself as a mechanic, works with his hands, salt-of-the-earth style person. So he's somebody that we would naturally trust, or rather, we wouldn't instinctively distrust due to how he's presented himself.
As I started to research the case, I realised that this was a pattern of behaviour over a long period of time, and he's netted an awful lot of money, close to £1 million that we know of.
The first conviction for him was in 1970, so I was 14 years old then. It was for a theft.
In 2013, he had been convicted both of mortgage fraud and of another romance scam involving 4 women, and he was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. While he was in prison, he found himself facing court again, and he was convicted of a series of romance frauds, and his sentence was extended by 12 months.
The police have told me that he is a very professional con man, which makes me feel a little bit better, but it's not 100%.
On a Thursday night, Gary is arrested in Sussex on suspicion of multiple counts of fraud and theft. committed against Carol and 2 other women.
I was thinking, right, OK, this is where he's going to stay until everything's put into place and we can go to court.
The police didn't have the grounds to keep him in remand. They released him on bail. I was panicking for Mum's safety because she was at that house on her own. He could be a violent person. I was thinking, is he going to find me? Is he going to come for me? It was quite stressful.
I got a phone call one day when I was at work to say that Gary was on the run.
The police tell Carol that Gary failed to turn up to a scheduled court appearance and they can't get hold of him.
They were doing everything they could to find where he was to get him back, but it could take time. So many things were going through my mind. I'm trying to think, how can I help them to get this man back? I had no power, nothing.
Whilst things are at a standstill in Sussex, 200 miles away, a new lead reveals that Gary is targeting his next victim. The officer investigating is PC Barbara Salvage.
A female contacted police asking for some advice. She was in a relationship with a man under one name, however, she found his driving licence in a different name. I did some digging and found out that actually he was wanted in several places, including Sussex. I contacted Sussex, asked for some information, and I worked alongside DC Noel Simmons.
When PC Salvage first contacted me as by email based on a marker that I'd put on Gary, she had received information that he had been defrauding a lady on her area.
He was delighted because it appeared that his investigation had gone cold because the perpetrator had literally disappeared into thin air.
There was very much a feel of the investigation had been renewed.
The trail of destruction and lives that he'd ruined behind him was pretty heartbreaking for me. People work hard for their money, yet he came along and took it, all for his own personal greed. And therefore I was driven to continue digging. We had to narrow down where he was going to be.
After months of trying to track down Gary, the victim who initially contacted PC Salvage gets back in touch with a critical piece of information.
The overwhelming breakthrough was when I had finished a night shift. I went home, I got in bed, and an hour later, the victim rang me to say that the offender was going to be having lunch in a nearby pub.
PC Salvage contacted me to say that she had a solid lead on where he was going to be. She was still waiting on some parts of key information as to exactly when he would be there, but it was very much in progress.
So I got my uniform back on, came back on duty, collated a team, and with that team, we pinpointed exactly the time that he'd be at the pub. We only had one opportunity to get it right. Luckily for me, I had been told precisely where he was sat in the beer garden, precisely what he was wearing, and so I approached him. He was very surprised to see me. I arrested him for the high romance fraud from Sussex. He resisted, placed a handcuff on him to avoid any issues. His pattern of offending was actually his downfall because he became sloppy in the end. He felt he was untouchable, and he started to leave clues behind.
He'd been doing exactly the same thing again. He had multiple phones on him at the time.
The first thing he asked me is, how did I know he was there? I just told him that it was due to great investigative work. I got the impression he wasn't very pleased that it was a woman doing the arresting, because he was disrespectful to me and my colleague, but he immediately calmed down when he saw two big burly policemen. He actually just sat back and, I think, realised that his time was up. And that's always very satisfying.
Gary had been on the run for over a year, and one day I'd got a phone call to say that a lady officer had recognised him and she arrested him. And I was very happy.
When I sat down to interview Gary, his play was to, again, present a persona, come across as trustworthy, and effectively present a case to trying to get away with it. I'm so hard done by. I tried my best for these women. They're being unreasonable. They knew what they were getting into. I'm the victim in this circumstance. After the interview, there was a little bit of a crack in his facade, and there was just a look on his face that was very different to anything that he had presented through the interview. He asked, so what do you think my chances are then?
This time, Gary is denied bail, and a court date is set for the 6th of July, 2020.
The police said that they'd got such a strong case that I didn't need to go to court, which I was quite pleased about.
I felt, oh, this is coming to an end. We're finally going to get everything that he deserves, and we're going to be able to finally move on about this whole situation.
I can remember being at home with a friend of mine the day of the court case, and she was sitting next to me and my phone went off. I put my phone on loudspeaker and it was my detective that I spoke to. He said, I've got some news for you. The judge was absolutely disgusted with what he'd done to women that work in care. He sent him down for 10 years, which is the highest that anyone could go down for.
At court, Gary is convicted of fraud, battery, and witness intimidation.
I was over the moon. It was over.
He targeted good people in caring professions.
Their aim was companionship and love and trust for the rest of their days. His aim was to fleece them out of every single thing they owned. Savings, their homes, their cars, everything they had. And he left them destitute.
In total, Carol has lost £180,000. She will never get her money back, and neither will her children.
My children's money, that's what hurt more than anything, because he always said to me, I would never, ever hurt your children. And he did. Yes, it was upsetting for what he did to me, but my kids done nothing for him to take their money from them for a good start in life.
You never think it's going to happen to you. He's finally going to get what he deserves. He's going to know how it feels to have everything taken away from you.
I don't know how to move on. I'm frightened to have a relationship now. I can't do it, but I don't want to be on my own. I'm lonely. I don't know how to get through it. I just have to try and make my life happy. But in the back of my mind, it's constantly there. He's in prison. He's going to pay his time. I'm going to pay for this until the day I pass away.